Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is private property. The voice was slick with a practiced, condescending patience. It belonged to a young man named Julian Vance, though the man on the other side of the vast marble desk didn't know that. He didn't care. All he knew was the cold. The cold from the November night still clinging to his simple wool coat, and the deeper, more familiar cold of being told he was in the wrong place. Silas Blackwood, age 72, stood in the center of the lobby of the Apex Tower. It was a cathedral of corporate ambition, all glass and steel and recessed lighting that made the polished marble floors gleam like a frozen lake. His shoes were sensible, rubber-soled, and they made no sound on the floor. He held a worn leather portfolio in one hand. It was the only thing about him that looked expensive, and even that was a quiet, aged luxury, not a shout. "I'm not leaving," Silas said. His voice was calm, low. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to, but it made no demands. It simply stated a fact. Julian Vance, the night manager, smirked. He gestured to the two security guards who had materialized from the shadows, their uniforms crisp, their faces impassive. "We have an intruder, gentlemen, refusing to vacate." He said the word intruder with a particular relish, leaning into the microphone of the desk phone, even though he was no longer on a call. It was for show. Everything was for show. A few late-working tenants and their guests had paused by the elevator bank, sensing the low-grade drama. One of them, a young woman in a blazer, had her phone angled just so, recording. Julian's eyes, a pale, chilly blue, swept over Silas's appearance one more time. The plain coat, the simple trousers, the graying hair. He saw a janitor who'd lost his way, a delivery driver who'd gotten the wrong address, a homeless man seeking shelter from the wind. He saw anything and everything but the truth. Look, he sighed, the performance of theatrical exasperation now in full swing. I don't know who you think you are, but the penthouse is off limits. The entire top floor is. So, unless you have a key card that says otherwise, you need to turn around and walk out that door. He pointed a manicured finger toward the revolving glass doors, which spun silently, spitting gusts of frigid city air into the climate-controlled perfection of the lobby. The two police officers who pushed through those doors a few minutes later were a study in contrasts. One was older, with a face that had seen every kind of city trouble, his movements slow and deliberate. The other was young, barely out of the academy, his posture rigid, his hand resting near his sidearm. Julian's face lit up. The cavalry had arrived. "Officers, thank you for the quick response," he began, his voice taking on a new tone of officious gravity. "This individual has been trespassing. He's making outlandish claims and refusing to cooperate. We believe he may be disoriented." The older officer ignored Julian. His gaze settled on Silas, who hadn't moved an inch. He was just a still point in the swirling currents of the lobby's manufactured importance. The officer saw the calm. He saw the dignity. He saw the absence of fear. And that, more than anything, gave him pause. "Sir," the officer said, his voice respectful but firm, "there's been a report of a disturbance. Can you tell me your name?" Silas met his gaze. "My name is Silas Blackwood." Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. "He's been saying that. It's the name of the CEO of Blackwood Logistics, the company that just bought the holding group. He probably read it in the news." The officer kept his eyes on Silas. "Do you have any identification, Mr. Blackwood?" Silas nodded slowly. He reached into his coat, and for a split second the younger officer tensed. But all he produced was a simple, worn leather wallet. He handed a driver's license to the officer. The lobby was silent now, save for the hum of the ventilation. The officer took the license, He looked at the picture. He looked at the name. He looked back up at the quiet, elderly black man in the simple wool coat. Oh, and in that moment the entire world shifted on its axis. The officer's back straightened. His professional mask dissolved, replaced by something that looked like disbelief, then dawning comprehension, then a profound and sudden respect. He handed the license back with a reverence usually reserved for a sacred object. They told the cops there was an intruder on the top floor. They were right about one thing: he was at the top. 45 years before that night, there was no Apex Tower. There was just a 2-room apartment over a laundromat in a part of the city the maps seemed to forget. There was the constant rumble of washing machines through the floorboards, the smell of bleach and hot cotton in the air. And there was Silas Blackwood, age 27, with a rented Ford Falcon and a dream so big it felt like a sickness. Beside him, always, was Eleanor. Eleanor. Her name was a poem. She had eyes that saw the numbers behind the world, the hidden arithmetic of profit and loss, risk and reward. While Silas had the vision, the gut feeling for roots, the handshake that could seal a deal, the relentless optimism, Eleanor had the ledger. She sat at their small kitchen table every night, a single lamp burning, and with a sharpened pencil and a stack of paper, she built the foundation of their empire. $1, one invoice, one carefully balanced column at a time. Their first company wasn't called Blackwood Logistics. It was called S&E Hauling. The S for Silas, the E for Eleanor. Their first contract was delivering baked goods for a local pastry shop at 4 a.m. every morning. Silas would load the trays into the back of the Falcon, the seats covered in plastic sheeting. He drove through the sleeping city, the smell of fresh bread filling the car. He'd come home just as the sun was rising and Eleanor would have coffee waiting. They'd sit at that small table, their hands touching over the worn formica, and they'd count the day's earnings. $23, sometimes $31. It felt like a fortune. They faced a world that wasn't built for them. Banks that saw the color of their skin before they saw the numbers in Eleanor's ledger. The loan officer who smiled a thin, pitying smile and said, "Perhaps something more manageable? A small business loan for a barber shop, maybe?" They walked out of that bank, the rejection hanging in the air between them, and Silas felt a rage so hot it almost choked him. But Eleanor just squeezed his hand. "Their loss," she whispered. "We'll build it ourselves." And they did. They saved every penny. They ate beans and rice for a year straight to save up for the down payment on their first real truck, a used International Harvester that belched smoke and groaned on every incline. Silas named it the Beast. He learned to fix the engine himself, his hands permanently stained with grease. Eleanor found a loophole in the city's commercial zoning that allowed them to lease a small, forgotten patch of gravel behind a tire factory for pennies on the dollar. That was their first depot. The routine was their religion. Up at 3:30 a.m., Silas would check the truck, the tires, the oil. Eleanor would pack him a lunch in a metal box, 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a thermos of sweet tea. He'd be on the road before the first light hit the skyline. He drove. He hauled construction debris. He moved furniture for families leaving the city. He transported pallets of textiles from the port. He did the jobs no one else wanted, the late-night runs, the holiday deliveries. He was just motion, just asphalt, just discipline. Eleanor, meanwhile, was the anchor. She was the one who called suppliers, who negotiated fuel prices, who filed the endless paperwork. She was the one who faced the skepticism and the thinly veiled racism of a dozen different gatekeepers. Her voice always even, her logic unassailable. She wore her simple dresses like armor and her reading glasses like a weapon. People underestimated her. They saw a quiet, unassuming black woman, and they didn't see the brilliant strategist who could calculate freight tonnage and fuel efficiency in her head. Their condescension was her secret advantage. She let them talk down to her right up until the moment she secured a contract they thought was impossible. They had a motto, a quiet promise they'd repeat to each other in the dark of their small apartment. Brick by brick. That's how you build a house. That's how you build a life. That's how you build an empire when the world gives you no blueprint. One brick, one truck, one contract, one day at a time. Years passed. The Ford Falcon was replaced by the Beast. The Beast was joined by a second truck, then a third. The gravel lot became a small, rented warehouse. The warehouse became a larger, owned distribution center. S&E Hauling became Blackwood Logistics, a name that started to command respect. They moved out of the apartment over the laundromat and into a small house with a yard. Silas planted a garden for Eleanor, full of the roses she loved. But the world always demands a price. The long hours, the stress, the years of fighting for every inch. It took a toll. Eleanor was diagnosed with a sickness that started in her lungs and slowly stole her breath. Silas poured their growing fortune into doctors, into specialists, into treatments. He would have traded every truck, every warehouse, every dollar just to hear her laugh again without it turning into a painful cough. He sat by her bedside for months. He held her hand, now thin and frail, and told her about the business. He told her about the new contracts, the new drivers, the new plans. He read to her from the business journals she loved. He watched the light in her brilliant eyes slowly dim. One evening, looking out the hospital window at the sprawling city skyline, she squeezed his hand. "Promise me something, Si," she whispered, her voice a thread. "Don't just make it big. Make it permanent. Build something with our name on it, something tall, something they can't ignore, something that stands up so high it touches the clouds." He promised. Eleanor passed away 2 weeks later. Silas felt a silence descend that was louder than any engine, more vast than any highway. He went back to work, but the fire in his belly was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy sense of duty. He was no longer building for the joy of it. He was building to keep a promise. He was laying bricks for a ghost. He became a legend in the logistics world, but a phantom in public life. He bought competitors, innovated shipping technologies, and built a network that crisscrossed the continent. Blackwood Logistics became a titan, a quiet giant that moved the very bones of the country's economy. And Silas Blackwood became a billionaire, 9 times over. But he still drove a 10-year-old Lincoln Town car. He still wore simple, well-made suits that were a decade out of style. And in his worn leather portfolio, beside the billion-dollar contracts and acquisition proposals, he always kept a small, faded photograph of a young woman with brilliant eyes, standing proudly in front of a rusty Ford Falcon. He was building something tall, and he had just found the perfect place to put the flag. Julian Vance believed in the religion of aesthetics. His god was brand identity, and the Apex Tower was his temple. He wasn't just a night manager. In his own mind, he was the chief priest, the guardian of the sanctum. His job, as he saw it, was to protect the building's aura of untouchable, effortless wealth. And that meant curating not just the flower arrangements and the piped-in ambient music, but the people. His life was a meticulously constructed facade. He lived in a tiny, overpriced studio apartment 30 blocks away, but his Instagram feed told a different story. It was a highlight reel of a life he didn't lead. Photos of him leaning against a Ferrari in the building's garage. It belonged to a hedge fund manager on the 48th floor. A selfie of him holding a glass of champagne at a Penthouse party. He was there to supervise the catering staff. A candid shot of him laughing with a visiting celebrity. He had asked for the photo after calling them a taxi. His bio read, Curator of Luxury Experiences, Apex Tower, Building a Lifestyle. He had 4,312 followers, a number he checked obsessively. His morning ritual was sacred. It began not with an alarm clock, but with the gentle glow of his phone as he scrolled through feeds of influencers in Dubai and Monaco. He'd study their poses, their captions, their calculated nonchalance. Then came the grooming. A 5-step facial cleansing routine with products that cost more than his weekly groceries. He used a special wax for his hair, sculpting it into a style that looked artfully messy, but was in fact structurally rigid. He owned 17 different ties, and the selection of the day's tie was a matter of deep contemplation. Which one said, effortless authority? Which one complemented the lobby's travertine walls? He arrived at the Apex Tower an hour before his shift, not to get a head start on work, but to immerse himself in the atmosphere. He'd walk the perimeter of the lobby, running a finger along the countertops to check for dust. He'd adjust a cushion on a lobby sofa by 1/4 of an inch. He was a conductor tuning his orchestra before a performance. His power was discretionary, and he wielded it like a weapon. He had an almost supernatural ability to sniff out who belonged and who didn't. It had nothing to do with character or worth, and everything to do with signifiers. The brand of a watch, the cut of a coat, the sound a briefcase made when it was set on the floor. A tech bro in a hoodie and expensive sneakers waved right through. A woman in a couture dress with a tiny, yapping dog greeted by name. But a food delivery courier, a repairman, or anyone who looked like they might have to work for a living was met with a wall of suspicion. He trained his staff in this silent, brutal calculus. He called it maintaining brand integrity. They had code words. A code 3 meant a tourist who'd wandered in to take pictures. They were to be politely but firmly ejected. A code 5 was a potential vagrant, requiring an immediate call to security. He saw himself and his team as the gatekeepers of a modern-day castle, protecting the royalty within from the peasantry without. His cruelty was performative. He was at his worst when he had an audience. He would loudly question a delivery person's credentials, making them unpack their entire bag on the floor to verify the order. He once made a florist recut the stems of an entire arrangement because he felt they were a centimeter too long, all while a group of smiling residents looked on. They saw it as attention to detail. The florist saw it as humiliation. Julian fed on their approval. It was his currency. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation with Silas Blackwood, Julian was on edge. The news had broken that the entire building, under its parent holding company, had been sold. The buyer was the famously reclusive Blackwood Logistics. Julian had spent hours online, trying to find a picture of the new owner, Silas Blackwood, but the man was a ghost. There were no recent photos, no interviews, no society pages. This lack of information terrified Julian. His entire system was based on recognition, on separating the important faces from the unimportant ones. An invisible owner was a variable he couldn't control. He compensated by becoming even more draconian. He implemented a new, stricter ID check policy. He gave his security team lectures on being proactive in identifying non-conforming individuals. He was a little king polishing the bars of his cage, terrified of the world outside. The night Silas Blackwood walked through the revolving doors, Julian didn't see a man. He saw a test. He saw a threat to the perfect, sterile, and fragile world he had built for himself. He saw a Code 5, and he saw an opportunity to perform his authority, to show the invisible new owners, wherever they were, that he was the vigilant guardian of their pristine investment. He had no idea he was auditioning for his own execution. The acquisition of Omnicorp Holdings, the parent company of the Apex Tower, was finalized at 9:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. The transfer of funds, a number with 10 zeros, was a silent digital waterfall. For the army of lawyers and bankers who had worked on the deal for 18 months, it was a moment for champagne and bonuses. For Silas Blackwood, it was just a confirmation email. He read it in his modest office at a sprawling logistics hub near the airport, an office that overlooked a sea of his company's trucks, not the city skyline. He felt no elation, just the quiet, heavy weight of a promise moving one step closer to fulfillment. He worked the rest of the day. A meeting about fuel futures, a conference call about expanding their South American routes, a review of the pension plan for his 15,000 employees. He ate his lunch at his desk, a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, packed that morning by his housekeeper, just as Eleanor used to do. To everyone around him, it was just another Tuesday. No one knew he had just become the landlord of the most prestigious address in the city. The press release was scheduled for the next morning. For a few more hours, he was still anonymous. A ghost. He left the office at 7 p.m., same as always. His driver, a retired Army sergeant named Henderson, who had been with him for 20 years, was waiting with the Lincoln. "Home, Mr. B?" Henderson asked. Silas paused, his hand on the car door. He looked toward the distant cluster of downtown lights, a glittering constellation on the horizon. The tallest, sharpest star in that constellation was the Apex Tower. "No, Henderson, not tonight. Take me downtown, to the corner of 6th and Marlowe." Henderson raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. He navigated the familiar route into the heart of the city. As they drew closer, the Apex Tower grew, a spire of dark glass and light piercing the clouds. It was magnificent and arrogant, a monument to the very kind of wealth Silas had always disdained, the loud, performative kind. And now he owned it. He had Henderson Park a block away. "I'm going to walk over," Silas said. "I won't be long. I just need to see it." "Everything all right, sir?" "It's for Eleanor," Silas said quietly. It was all the explanation Henderson needed. He'd known them both. He understood. Silas's errand was simple, spiritual. It was not a corporate inspection or a victory lap. He wanted to do what Eleanor had asked. He wanted to stand on the top floor, in the empty cavernous penthouse that the previous owner had used for parties, and he wanted to look out over the city. He wanted to be alone with his memory of her, at the highest point he could reach, and tell her, "We did it." Brick by brick. It was a pilgrimage, a quiet, solitary act of remembrance. He needed no entourage, no announcement, no keycard. In his mind, his promise was the only key he required. He walked the block in the biting wind. The city was a symphony of noise, sirens, horns, the chatter of people hurrying home. But as he approached the entrance to the Apex Tower, it all seemed to fade. The building had its own gravity, its own bubble of enforced tranquility. He pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. The warmth was immediate, but it was a sterile warmth. The air smelled of nothing, a testament to a powerful and expensive filtration system. The scale of the place was designed to make a person feel small. The ceilings soared 3 stories high. A massive, abstract sculpture that looked like a tangle of chrome noodles dominated the center of the room. And behind the long, glowing desk sat Julian Vance, like a spider in the center of a web. Silas approached the desk. He was not nervous. He was not arrogant. He was simply a man with a purpose. He waited patiently for Julian to finish a call that sounded more social than professional. When Julian finally looked up, his eyes flicked over Silas, and the mask of polite indifference dropped into place. "Can I help you?" The question was a formality. The tone said, "State your lowly business and be gone." "Yes," Silas said, his voice quiet. "I need to go to the penthouse." The request hung in the air. It was so simple, so direct, so completely out of sync with the man Julian perceived him to be. It was the spark, the grain of sand in the oyster, the beginning of the end. Silas wasn't there for a fight. He wasn't there to prove a point. He was a widower on a quiet mission to honor his wife. But he had just walked into a room where humility was mistaken for weakness, and dignity was invisible to the naked eye. Julian's smile was a masterpiece of condescension. It didn't touch his eyes. It was a slight upward twitch of one side of his mouth, a silent judgment rendered and confirmed. "The penthouse?" he repeated, drawing the word out as if it were an exotic, unfamiliar term. He leaned back in his chair, a king on his throne, and made a show of looking around the empty lobby. "I'm sorry. Are you expecting someone? The residents of the penthouse floor don't typically entertain walk-ins." Silas stood his ground. His patience was a deep, still reservoir, fed by decades of slights far worse than this. "I'm not here to see anyone. I need to go up myself." "And you are?" Julian prompted, tapping a pen on his desk blotter. The tapping was a tiny, aggressive drumbeat. Annoyance, dismissal, contempt. "My name is Silas Blackwood." A flicker of something, recognition, confusion, crossed Julian's face before he suppressed it. The name was right. It was the name of the mysterious new owner. But the package was all wrong. This man, this relic in his drab coat, couldn't possibly be the titan of industry. It was a logical impossibility in Julian's carefully curated world. The conclusion was obvious. This was a crank, a con artist, or worse, a mentally ill person with delusions of grandeur. "Right," Julian said with a humorless chuckle. He turned to the junior staffer beside him, a young woman with wide, nervous eyes who watched him for cues. He gave her a subtle eye roll. The performance had begun. "Look, Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the ambition, but the top floor is secured. Access is for residents and authorized personnel only. Are you with the maintenance crew? There was a report about a leak in the HVAC on 47. The humiliation was deliberate. It was a public demotion. In Julian's world, there were only two kinds of people, those who gave orders and those who took them. By offering the role of a maintenance worker, he was attempting to force Silas into a subordinate category, a box he could understand and control. "I am not with maintenance," Silas said, his voice remaining impossibly steady. The young woman with the phone was still filming, more openly now. The small audience by the elevators had grown. A couple, dressed for a gala, had stopped. Their curiosity piqued. They were watching the exchange like a piece of street theater. This was Julian's fuel. "Okay, then are you making a delivery?" Julian pressed, his voice getting louder, projecting to his audience. "Because if you are, you should know that all deliveries go through the service entrance in the rear. This lobby is for tenants and their guests. It is not a thoroughfare." Each word was a small stone being thrown. "You don't belong here. You are common. You are in my way." Silas felt a familiar weariness settle into his bones. He could see the whole ugly tableau, the smirking manager, the silent, complicit staff, the entertained onlookers. He had faced this scene 1,000 times in his life, at bank counters, at country club gates, at restaurant hostess stands. It was the same tired, ugly play, just with a more expensive set. "Son," Silas said, and the word, so paternal and calm, seemed to infuriate Julian more than any insult could. "I am not making a delivery. I am not here to fix your air conditioning. I own this building, and I would like to go to the top floor." The statement, delivered so plainly, was met with a beat of stunned silence, followed by a nervous titter from Julian's subordinate. Julian himself threw his head back and laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was a sharp, barking sound of disbelief, a performance of ridicule. "Oh, that's good. That's really good," he said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "You own the building. I like that. You've got guts, I'll give you that." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper. "But I'm the one with the key card, old man, and you're not on my list." He picked up his phone. He held it up, screen facing outward, and started a live stream. The little red dot went live. "Evening, followers," he said into the phone, a grin plastered on his face. "Just another exciting night at the Apex, doing a little brand management. You've got to be vigilant to protect the integrity of a luxury environment." He panned the phone's camera slowly, deliberately, over Silas's face. To his 4,312 followers, Silas was now just content, a nameless, faceless obstacle in a story about Julian's own importance. "So, as I was saying," Julian said, putting the phone down on the desk but leaving the stream running. "You have two options. You can turn around and walk out of here with your dignity, what's left of it. Or you can wait here while I have the police escort you out. Your choice." He leaned back, crossing his arms. The checkmate. He had cornered the old man. He had publicly shamed him. He had broadcast it to his followers. He had asserted his dominance and protected the sanctum. He had won. He smiled, waiting for the inevitable retreat. There is a moment in every confrontation that matters more than the clash itself. It is the pause, the breath before the storm. It is the instant when a choice is made, when a path is irrevocably taken. For Silas Blackwood, that moment arrived. It was a quiet internal fulcrum on which the rest of the night and many lives would pivot. He saw the smug, triumphant look on Julian's face. He heard the faint, tinny sound of Julian's voice still narrating his own heroism to the live stream on his phone. He felt the weight of the stares from the onlookers by the elevators. They weren't hostile. They were just watching, passively consuming his humiliation as a momentary diversion. And he was tired. So deeply, existentially tired. A weariness that went all the way down to his soul. He was 72 years old. He had buried the love of his life. He had fought battles in boardrooms and back alleys, metaphorical and real. He had built an empire from nothing but grit and grief. He didn't need this. He didn't need to prove anything to this boy in a well-fitting suit. His first instinct was to walk away, just turn around, push through the glass doors and disappear back into the anonymity of the city night. He could go home to his quiet, empty house. Tomorrow the press release would go out. The world would know. He could have Julian and his entire staff fired with a single phone call. It would be efficient, clean, bloodless. His body almost followed the thought. He felt his shoulders begin to turn. His hand, the one not holding the portfolio, lifted slightly, preparing to gesture a final, dismissive goodbye. He could almost feel the cold air on his face as he stepped outside. Freedom. Peace. But then, he thought of Eleanor. He thought of her at their kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration over the ledger. He thought of her facing down the sneering loan officer, her dignity a shield. He thought of her small, fierce pride in their first rusty truck, and he heard her voice, a whisper from across the years. Don't just make it big. Make it permanent. Something they can't ignore. Walking away felt like ignoring it. It felt like conceding that Julian's world, a world of surfaces, of brands, of judging a man by his coat, had the power to make him leave. It felt like letting the boy win, even if only for a night. A victory for every gatekeeper who had ever told him, or anyone who looked like him, you don't belong. To leave would be to validate the premise, to agree that his presence here, in this lobby, in his own building, was indeed a disruption. He looked at the worn leather of the portfolio in his hand. Inside was Eleanor's picture. He had brought her here, in a way. He had brought her to the foot of the monument he had built in her name. And this boy, this child of privilege and aesthetics, was telling her she wasn't welcome. The weariness in his bones didn't vanish, but something else rose up to meet it. Not anger, not rage. It was something colder and harder. It was resolve, a sudden, crystalline certainty. This wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about his pride. It was about the promise. It was about the principle. Some lessons, he realized, cannot be delivered by press release. Some lessons have to be taught in person. His hand, which had been poised to push open the door to the street, fell back to his side. The slight turn of his shoulders reversed. He settled back into his stance, feet planted firmly on the marble floor he now owned. The moment had passed. The choice was made. The shift was almost imperceptible. There was no grand gesture, no sudden outburst. It was in the small things. Silas Blackwood straightened his back, a subtle movement that seemed to add inches to his height. He shifted the leather portfolio from his right hand to his left. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and unbuttoned his simple wool coat. He didn't take it off. He just opened it, as if to let the air in, as if he were preparing for work. He took 2 slow steps forward, closing the distance to the marble desk until he was standing directly in front of Julian Vance. The space between them was now charged, intimate. The lobby, which had been humming with whispers and the sound of the live stream, fell utterly silent. Even the distant city noise seemed to fade away. Everyone was watching. Silas placed his worn leather portfolio on the gleaming marble countertop. The sound it made, a soft, heavy, final thud, was the only sound in the vast room. It was the sound of a gauntlet being thrown down, not with a clash of steel, but with the quiet weight of history. He looked directly into Julian's pale blue eyes. There was no anger in his gaze. There was no threat. There was only a profound and unnerving calm. It was the calm of a man who knew the outcome before the game had even begun. "Call the police," Silas said. The words were not a plea. They were not a challenge. They were an instruction, delivered with the flat, quiet authority of a man who was used to his instructions being followed without question. Julian was momentarily thrown. This was not in the script. The old man was supposed to scuttle away in shame, or argue impotently. He wasn't supposed to calmly demand the very consequence Julian had threatened him with. But the audience was watching. His live stream was active. He had to maintain control. A smug grin returned to his face, though it was a bit more brittle this time. "If you insist," he said. He picked up the desk phone, his movements a little too sharp, a little too fast. He theatrically punched in 911. "Yes, police?" he said into the receiver, his voice artificially loud. "I'm calling from the Apex Tower at 6th and Marlowe. We have an intruder in the lobby. Yes, an adult male. He's refusing to leave the premises. He's being delusional, making threats. No, he's not armed, but he's unstable." Silas just waited. He didn't react. He didn't defend himself. He just stood there, a pillar of stillness, his open coat like a judge's robes. His silence was more powerful than any argument. It created a vacuum that Julian's nervous chatter rushed to fill, exposing its own hollowness. The 2 police officers arrived less than 5 minutes later. The older veteran, Officer Miller, and his young, tense partner, Officer Chen. They saw the scene: the smug manager, the small crowd of onlookers, and the old black man standing calmly at the desk. It was a routine call they had handled 100 times. Officer Miller took the lead. "All right, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice tired. "Thank God you're here, officer," Julian gushed. "This man has been trespassing for the last 20 minutes. I've asked him to leave repeatedly. He's claiming he owns the building and is refusing to go." Miller turned his attention to Silas. It was the moment of the takedown. "Sir," Miller began, his hand gesturing vaguely toward the door, "we need you to come with us. Let's take a walk and figure this out." "I'm not going anywhere," Silas said, his voice still quiet but now with an edge of command. "But before you put your hands on me, Officer Miller, I need you to do 2 things." Miller paused. The man knew his name, which was visible on his uniform, but he said it with an unnerving familiarity. "First," Silas continued, reaching slowly into his wallet, "you're going to run my identification." He held out his driver's license. "Second, you're going to get on your radio and ask your dispatcher to confirm the BOLO, the Be on the Lookout, that was issued this afternoon by the mayor's office regarding the new owner of this property." The air crackled. This was not the typical rambling of a disoriented person. This was specific, procedural, confident. Officer Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took the ID. The plastic felt solid, real. The name read, Silas Blackwood. Officer Miller was a 20-year veteran of the force. He had a 6th sense for trouble, a finely tuned instinct for distinguishing between genuine threats and simple human misery. And something about the man in front of him, Silas Blackwood, felt different. It was the stillness, the total lack of fear. Miller had seen that look before, but usually on men who had nothing left to lose. This man didn't look broken. He looked patient. He took the driver's license. The photo matched. The name was the one the manager had mocked. He walked a few paces away, turning his back to the desk for a semblance of privacy, and lifted his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 214. Can I get a check on a driver's license? Blackwood Silas, BLACKWOOD. He read off the date of birth and license number. Chen, his young partner, stood stiffly, his eyes darting between Silas and Julian, his hand still resting on his hip. Julian watched with a triumphant smirk, certain of his vindication. The crowd of onlookers held their breath, their phones still raised. The dispatcher's voice, a calm, professional woman's, crackled back through the radio. 214, we have a positive ID on Silas Blackwood. Address is current. There was a pause. Then, the dispatcher's voice returned, lower, more urgent. 214, be advised, we have a flag on that name. From the chief's office, came down this afternoon. Miller's grip on the radio tightened. Go ahead, dispatch. Subject is Silas Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Logistics. Confirmed new majority owner of Omnicorp Holdings. Effective 0900 hours this morning. That portfolio includes the property at your current location, the Apex Tower. There is an advisory from the Mayor's Economic Council to all departments. Subject is to be afforded any and all courtesies. I repeat, subject is the new owner of the premises. How do you copy, 214? Officer Miller felt a cold dread wash over him, followed by a wave of white-hot clarity. He looked over his shoulder, past Julian's smug face, to the calm, elderly man who had just been accused of trespassing in his own building. He saw it all in a flash. The simple coat, the quiet dignity, the manager's performative cruelty, the silent onlookers. He had almost arrested a billionaire on the word of a preening fool. Copy that, dispatch, Miller said, his voice now a tight, controlled rasp. Situation is under control. 214 out. He turned around. The entire lobby was watching him, waiting for the verdict. He walked back to Silas Blackwood, but his posture was different. His shoulders were squared, his head was bowed almost imperceptibly. He extended the driver's license back to Silas, holding it with two hands as if it were a citation he was receiving, not one he was giving. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, and his voice was loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. It was clear, formal, and ringing with apology. "Sir, my deepest apologies for the misunderstanding." Then he turned his gaze on Julian Vance. The smirk on Julian's face had frozen, then cracked, then completely dissolved into a mask of pale, dawning horror. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Miller's voice was like ice. "This man," he said, gesturing with his thumb toward Silas, "isn't an intruder. He owns this building. He owns the company you work for. He owns your desk, your chair, and your ridiculous-looking tie." He took a step closer to Julian, his voice dropping but losing none of its menace. "You called 911 and filed a false report about the man who signs your paycheck. You accused him of being unstable. You wasted city resources and you humiliated a citizen. You're lucky he's not pressing charges." The unmasking was complete. It was brutal, public. The young woman who had been live-streaming on her phone now turned it on Julian, her expression a mixture of shock and glee. The couple dressed for the gala were staring, mouths agape. Julian's junior staffer looked like she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. And Julian Vance, the self-proclaimed curator of luxury experiences, just stood there, his face the color of ash, his entire world collapsing in on him in the space of 30 seconds. The live stream on his phone was still running, broadcasting his silent, slack-jawed ruin to his 4,312 followers and soon to the entire world. The king of the castle had just been unmasked as the court jester. The aftermath was not a storm. It was a silent, swift, and total demolition. The videos from the lobby, Julian's own live stream, the gala-goer's phone, the junior staffer's panicked recording, were online before Officer Miller and his partner had even finished filing their report. By morning, #ApexIntruder was trending. The story was irresistible. It had heroes and villains, hubris and humility, a quiet, dignified black billionaire, a loud, arrogant manager, a public shaming that backfired in the most spectacular way possible. News outlets picked it up, from local blogs to national networks. The narrative was clear. A story of modern-day classism and racism, served with a delicious side of corporate karma. For Julian Vance, the downfall was absolute. He didn't even get a formal meeting. At 8:01 a.m., an email with a single sentence arrived in his inbox from the newly installed board of Omnicorp Holdings. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." His keycard was deactivated remotely. His corporate email account was erased. When he arrived at the Apex Tower to collect his personal belongings from his locker, he was met by a new security team, not the one he had worked with, but a stony-faced crew from a different company, who escorted him in and out like a common criminal. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. His Instagram account was flooded with tens of thousands of comments mocking his luxury lifestyle and calling him out for his bigotry. He deleted the account within 24 hours, vanishing from the digital world he had so desperately tried to conquer. The collateral damage was precise. The junior staffer who had stood by and smirked was also terminated. The two security guards who had passively followed Julian's lead were reassigned by their company to a warehouse in an industrial park. The security company itself was put on notice. Their multi-million-dollar contract with the Apex Tower was under formal review, a process that would end with its cancellation 3 months later. Silas Blackwood was invisible through it all. He issued no statements. He gave no interviews. He didn't have to. The event spoke for itself. The only public action came from the newly formed board of directors, acting on his silent instructions. They issued a public apology, not to Silas but to the city, for the failure of culture and training that the incident represented. They announced a complete overhaul of guest services and employee training across all Omnicorp properties, focusing on inclusivity and respect. The world saw it as a revenge story, a satisfying tale of a bully getting his comeuppance. But for Silas, it was never about revenge. The firing of Julian Vance was not a punishment. It was a simple correction. A broken part being removed from a machine. His focus was already elsewhere. He had stood in the penthouse that night after the police and the gawkers had left. He had stood by the vast floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city lights twinkling below. He had held the worn portfolio to his chest and whispered into the empty, silent room. "We're here, Eleanor, at the top." But standing there, he realized the height wasn't the point. Owning the tower wasn't the victory. A promise isn't just about achieving a goal. It's about what you do once you've achieved it. A monument of glass and steel was cold comfort. He needed to build something that lived, something that breathed, something that would open doors for others, the way so many had been closed to him and Eleanor. The penthouse was not going to be his office. It was going to be an incubator. The headlines faded, as they always do. The viral outrage moved on to its next target. But in the silence left behind, the real work began. The top floor of the Apex Tower, once a symbol of empty, decadent wealth, underwent a transformation. Silas didn't use his own money. He directed the Omnicorp board to allocate a significant portion of its annual profits, a sum that made the finance department gasp, to endow a new, independent foundation. He named it the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation for Entrepreneurial Spirit. Its mission was simple: to find, fund, and mentor promising young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. The kids who had the vision but couldn't get a bank loan. The ones who, like a young Silas and Eleanor, were told to think smaller. The penthouse was gutted. The marble-wet bar and sunken conversation pit were torn out. In their place came modular desks, whiteboards, and high-speed internet. It became a collaborative workspace, a launchpad. It was not a charity, it was an investment in human potential. A montage of progress unfolded over the next 6 months. We see construction workers transforming the space. We see the first cohort of young entrepreneurs arriving, a diverse group of kids in hoodies, jeans, and sneakers, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and imposter syndrome as they step out of the express elevator onto the top floor of the most exclusive building in the city. We see Silas, not as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a mentor. He walks among them, not in a suit, but in a simple sweater. He listens to their pitches for new apps, sustainable fashion lines, and community-based service companies. He doesn't lecture. He asks questions. What problem are you solving? Who is your customer? What's your Eleanor, the person who keeps the books and keeps you honest? He shares his own stories, not the triumphs, but the failures. The first truck that broke down, the contracts he lost, the times he wanted to quit. He makes his success feel attainable, not mythical. He demystifies the process, breaking it down into its most fundamental parts, brick by brick. The worn leather portfolio is always nearby. It sits on the main conference table during meetings, a silent testament to the foundation's namesake. Sometimes a student will ask about the faded picture inside, and Silas will tell them about a brilliant woman who built an empire from a kitchen table, armed with a pencil and an unshakable belief in the numbers. The foundation becomes a roaring success. Its first-year graduates launch a dozen new businesses, creating jobs and opportunities in the very neighborhoods the city's economy had forgotten. The story of the Apex Tower changes. It's no longer known for the arrogant manager who was fired, but for the vibrant hub of innovation on its top floor. Silas didn't just clean house, he rebuilt it from the top down, infusing it with a new purpose. He had kept his promise to Eleanor. He hadn't just built something tall, he had built something that would help others climb. 1 year to the day after the incident, a young woman named Maya stands before the revolving doors of the Apex Tower. She's 21 years old. She clutches a well-used laptop to her chest like a shield. She's wearing a hoodie from her state college, and her hands are trembling slightly. She's from a part of the city Silas would have recognized, a place of laundromats and forgotten storefronts. She is, by every metric Julian Vance would have used, a Code 5. An intruder. She takes a deep breath and pushes through the doors. The lobby is the same. The soaring ceilings, the gleaming marble, the abstract chrome sculpture. But the feeling is different. The air is warmer, more welcoming. The ambient music is a little more lively. And behind the long, glowing desk stands a new manager, a professional, middle-aged woman with a kind smile named Sarah. Sarah looks up as Maya approaches, her eyes holding none of the cold judgment of her predecessor. "Good morning," she says, her voice warm. "Can I help you?" Maya hesitates, her voice barely a whisper. I'm here for the foundation. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation?" Sarah's smile widens. "Of course. You must be Maya. We've been expecting you. Welcome to the Apex." She doesn't ask for ID. Maya's name is on her list, the only list that matters now. She gestures toward the elevator bank. The express elevator on the right is already waiting for you. Just press the button for the penthouse. The word penthouse sounds foreign and impossible to Maya. It's a word from movies, not from her life. "Thank you," she stammers, a wave of relief washing over her. She walks across the vast marble floor, her sneakers squeaking almost imperceptibly. She steps into the waiting elevator, its wood-paneled walls gleaming. There is only one button available to her, the one at the very top, labeled PH. She presses it. The elevator begins to rise, fast and silent. Through a small window, she sees the city fall away beneath her. The cars become toys. The streets become lines on a map. She is ascending. The doors open directly into the Foundation's workspace. It's a hive of bright, energetic activity. Young people are huddled around computers, scribbling on whiteboards, engaged in passionate debate. And standing by the far window, looking out over the city, is an elderly man in a simple gray sweater. He turns as the elevator doors open, and a gentle smile crosses his face. He walks over to her, his hand extended. "Maya," Silas Blackwood says, his voice as calm and steady as ever. "I'm so glad you could make it. We've been waiting for you. Welcome to the top." He doesn't see a girl in a hoodie from the wrong side of town. He sees potential. He sees a mind at work. He sees the future. And as he shakes her hand, he is not just welcoming her to a building. He is holding open a door to a world that was once closed to him. What does a lobby see? What does a glass door know? Nothing. They are just objects. They reflect the values of the people who command them. They can be barriers, or they can be gateways. The choice is always, always ours. We build these towers of glass and steel as monuments to our own success, but we forget that the real architecture is invisible. It's built out of respect. It's built out of dignity. It's built out of the simple, radical act of seeing a person for who they are, not for what they wear or where you think they belong. Think about the last time you made a snap judgment. The person in line at the grocery store. the driver who cut you off in traffic, the new employee who seemed out of their depth. How often do we elect ourselves the gatekeeper? How often do we, in some small way, become Julian Vance, deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on a flimsy set of our own biases? The world is full of people who will try to tell you that you don't belong in the room. They'll judge your coat, your accent, your background, your skin. They will use their tiny sliver of authority to make you feel small, to make you feel like an intruder in a world that isn't yours. They do this because they are terrified. They are terrified that the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones they've dismissed, might just have more power than they could ever imagine. They are terrified you might just own the building. Silas Blackwood's story isn't about revenge. It's a story about value. The world told him his value was low. The banks, the loan officers, the Julian Vances of the world, they all made their assessment. And they were all wrong. He knew his value, Eleanor knew his value, and he never let their judgment become his truth. He just kept laying bricks. So what rooms have you been kept out of? What doors have been slammed in your face? And more importantly, when you finally get the key, when you finally find yourself on the top floor, will you lock the door behind you? Or will you build an elevator for everyone else? Think about it. Share this story if you believe in the power of quiet dignity. Comment below with a time you saw someone underestimated. And never, ever forget to keep laying your own bricks. #Underdog. #Billionaire Reveal. #Karma. #Quiet Dignity. #Never Judge.